This video is going to go through how to solve quadratic equations with two examples at the end by factorization and one where you don't need to use it. So the first bit is to look at an example of a quadratic equation. So if you've got something like this, the idea is to find values of x which would solve this equation. And usually you want the equation equaling 0 on the right hand side. So this one's already set up to do that. Now, one way you can go about this one is to rearrange it and solve it to get x on its own, because you've got x just in one term, so you can solve it using some of the ideas of linear equations. So we could add 15 to both sides, then divide by 3, so simple inverse operations, and then we get that x squared should equal 5. So at this point, when you square root, there will be two solutions, the positive and the negative, and when you get your answers for this, you should round using whatever sensible rounding you've been asked to do. So in this case, I've just given the example of 2 decimal places. It could be significant figures or something else. So that's one example of solving a quadratic. There are usually two solutions to these types of questions. So that's what you should be looking to put down. Now the second type that we're going to look at is where in the equation you've got your x squared, but you've also got another term involving x. Now at this point you could be tempted to go down inverse operations, and you could do that, but what you're likely to find is you can only get one of the values of x that solves the quadratic, and typically there's two. So in this case what we're going to do is we are going to try and get that 0 on the right hand side, so we're going to subtract 12x from both sides, giving us this equation here. Now it's at this point where factorization comes into the work, and so what you need to do is to try and factorize the left hand side. And hopefully you've already learned a bit about how to do that. So I'll just recap it now, but what you're looking for are common factors to both terms. So from the numbers 3 and 12, your common factor there, or highest common factor, is 3, so that's outside. But both terms also contain the letter x, so that can also be factored out. So at this point now where you need to start thinking about the values of x which is going to make this equation equal 0. And so the best way to do this is to split it into two smaller equations. One where the term outside the bracket, the 3x, equals 0, and one where the expression inside the brackets also equals 0. Now if you can make these equal 0, the whole equation left-hand side becomes 0, because the 3x and the x minus 4 are being multiplied, and if you multiply anything by 0, it's 0. So on the left, because 3x has to equal 0, the only value that works there is when x is 0. And on the right, the only value that's going to work is when x is 4. And so these are your two solutions to this type of quadratic equation problem. Now the last example is more of the traditional type of question you would see. This is much more common in, say, like an exam or something, where you actually have an x squared term, you will have so many x, and then you'll have a constant term at the end, 12. And usually it's already equaling 0. This is normally how they're set up. So at this point you need to factorize, but when you do that you are going to get a pair of brackets where x will be in both, and then you'll add or subtract some other value. This again could be a piece of work that you've already done, but if you haven't done this, the way to work out what a and b are going to be in the brackets is to think of the two values that would multiply to give an answer of positive 12, but would add together to give the value of negative 8. So if you go down that process, the two numbers you're going to come up with are negative 2 and negative 6. So if you pop those in the brackets where the a and the b are, you end up with your pair of brackets. Now like last time, because we want this to equal 0, we need to think about the values of x that we could put into these brackets to make it work. And so on the left, if you put x is 2, you would get 0, and on the right, if you put x is 6, you would get 0, and so you get your two solutions again. Now it can get more complicated than this, particularly if there's something like 2x squared at the front. Also, if inside the bracket it was to say plus 6, it means your value of x is negative 6, and so typically there are slight differences like this. It's not common to have decimals or fraction type answers, but that can happen, but it's less likely to, and this is the kind of thing that you would get. So hopefully that's been a quick recap and helpful for you in this type of work. Thank you.